Fantastic. Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to this, our second Labour Bame Network event. I'm Mariana Masters. I'm sure that some people already know me. I'll be chairing the event this evening. For those that don't know me, I'm a councillor in Lambeth. I was elected in 2018 and spent the last 2 years as chair of the Lambeth Labour group of 57 councillors. Before entering politics, I had a successful career in the City of London, working for large global companies, and have served as the co-chair of the Black Employees Network during this time. Our discussion tonight centres around the events of the global events that have been happening and the wider discussion within the Labour Party. The Labour Bame Network was established from a frustration of the lack of change within the Labour Party to encourage getting any Black, Asian and other ethnic minority members of the party involved at every level of politics, from constituency level, staffing and elected office. We also aim to stimulate debate and provide practical solutions that reflect our common needs across the various BAME communities to take the Labour Party and ultimately the country forward. There are many such new groups that have established quite recently, but we believe that our point of difference is that we embrace a diversity of opinions. A comradely welcome is extended to all supporters of the Labour Party, so regardless of any personal association, we want this space to be faction-free. We're hosting this town hall to hear from you, the members, on what it's like to be Black and in Britain. We look forward to having a wide-ranging debate and looking at the issues around systemic racism. The Labour Bame Network supports the Black Lives Matters movement, and we need to hear Black voices from our communities up and down the country. It was a really tragic moment when George Floyd was killed at the knee of a police officer, and footage went viral and has resulted in a global campaign. This campaign has really demonstrated the need for debates, whether it's about at memorials or monuments, to end racism. Calls to end minority injustice aren't new. Fighting for the rights of working class underdogs is why the Labour Party was founded. I grew up in the 1970s and 80s in Brixton, when racism was more in your face. But what's disturbing is that 50 years on, the struggle continues for us to get the basic education and housing, struggles to getting a job, frustrations once in a job, lack of opportunities, career progression, issues around accessing healthcare, the list goes on and on. But this isn't a moment to be despondent. We have a newly elected leader who says that he wants to embrace listening to all voices. So we want to come together tonight, and we want to hear, we have a great panel who want to share their experiences. And we also want to turn to you, the members, to help you share your experience as well with us. We have been, as a group, very reserved in sharing our truth. But from the example today of the young footballer Marcus Rashford, who's using his voice, sharing his trials of his childhood, has forced a change in government policy on free school meals over the summer holiday for vulnerable children, we can show that actually sharing helps us move forward. So enough from me. I'm going to, the way of this evening is that we have great panelists who's going to share for approximately 5 minutes each. And then we're going to open it up to you, the audience. Please feel free to put questions in the chat function, and we will try and get to as many people as possible to answer and to contribute. Please, I would say that this is an empowering space, so please be respectful when writing in the chat. We want to embrace diversity of opinion, but we have all suffered many forms of abuse in our lives. So if we could keep this respectful and a positive space and an empowering space. So I will now hand over to our panelists. And first up, we have Abdi Douali. Now, Abdi is, as many people probably know, is a great Labour Party activist. He was formerly Labour organiser in Canterbury and currently works in housing. Abdi, please share your experience.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and thank you all for turning up. I think this is a really important space that we have, and a very important conversation that we're having tonight. The only thing I wished is we were having it in better circumstances. I grew up in the 90s, and like many of people here, I have older brothers and sisters who really went through the struggles of the 80s and the 90s, and you know, more and profound racism that I experienced. But I think it's important for us to talk about our backgrounds and our experiences, because I think our experiences, although our experiences are similar in some regards, I think they affect us differently, and how we grow up and how we see the world and how we progress. Now, my parents, I'm of Somali background. My parents came to this country in the early 90s as Somali refugees. And they turned up here, you know, not having any money in their pockets, and came here for the sake of saving their lives. And they were poor. My dad, in fact, was a factory worker after coming to the country. My mother took up cleaning. Now, not a small family. I'm one of 10, so we're quite a big family. But my parents, from the get-go of arriving in this country, they had to really fend for themselves. And it was under a Conservative government at that point that they had to fight for work. And I remember my dad and mum, before the minimum wage came in, for example, were earning something that was around £1 an hour each, which, as anyone can know, you know, is hard to live on, more so when you've got 10 mouths to feed. Now, growing up, I think I had it easier than my brothers and sisters, because they were much older than me, and at the time in the 90s they were all going through high school or college or university, so I got to learn from their mistakes a lot of the time, but also I became aware of some of the challenges that they faced. I remember constantly my brothers and sisters being harassed by the police. I remember very vividly them being stopped and searched for no reason whatsoever, sometimes happening on Fridays when they were coming back from the mosque with my father. So I guess from a young age, that memory stuck with me. But the one memory that really I always remember is, I remember at the age of 7, after 9/11, I was walking down with my mother in Ealing Broadway, and she's a hijab-wearing Muslim, and her hijab was torn off from her by a man who was fairly drunk and spat in her face and said, you know, we don't want terrorists in this country. You know, my mum was frail, and bless her, you know, as a 7-year-old, for me, the most what made me really angry was the fact that I couldn't do anything about it. You know, I couldn't protect her, I couldn't help her. My poor mother was standing there crying, unfortunately. And growing up in the sort of school system, I remember, you know, going to primary school, and at the age of 10, I remember a primary school teacher saying to me, you know, yeah, you're just going to turn out like the other ones, like your brothers and sisters. And for some subconscious reason, you know, that's always been at the back of my mind. Whenever I do anything in terms of job, you know, in work or education, it's always been, you know, try to outdo them rather than me addressing what that teacher said directly, which has really stuck with me. And at the age of 11 or so, my parents decided that we should move back to Somaliland, which is the northern part of Somalia. When we lived there for 7 years, and it was a great country, but I had a problem because I didn't know where I was supposed to fit in, because I went back and I couldn't speak the language, and people said to me, you know, you're born in London, you don't understand us, you're not one of us. I came back here and people were telling me to go back home. So for me, growing up, I guess that conflict's always been in my head. I've never called myself English because I don't think I am. I'm a bit more comfortable with British, but it's the constant thing that goes in my head. You know, am I really from this country? Do I belong in this country? And you know, it's the voices that I hear in my head that I have to say, yes, I am. I'm entitled to this country as much as anyone else. I'm a tax-paying person. But unfortunately, you know, my experience has left those voices in my head. I'm not going to go into any further, but that's really my experience, and I think it's affected me in ways that I haven't appreciated before. But I've reflected on it over the last couple of weeks, and you know, I think I've fallen short of, you know, sometimes calling out racism and laughing along, and when someone makes a comment about your skin color. And I think going forward, I'm never going to do that again. I think these last couple of weeks have really had that impact on me personally.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being so honest. Next we have Martin Edipur. Dr. Martin Edipur is the incoming clinical director for the Newham North Primary Care Network. He's an NHS GP and vice chair of the Fabian Society. He was a Labour Party parliamentary candidate for Witham in 2019 general election, and is a founding member of the Labour Bame network. So over to you now, Martin.
Thank you, Mariana, for the introduction, and thank you, Abdi, for sharing your personal story. We've all come together today to discuss what is a momentous moment in history. We've all seen protests around the world originating in America, triggered by the absolutely horrific and tragic event of George Floyd having his life sapped away from him by a police officer. For me, watching that video was very, very difficult. When I saw George Floyd passing away, I not only saw him, I saw my brother, I saw my father, I saw myself. And it showed us in real time the institutional and structural racism that still exists and has practical impacts. We've now seen protests in the UK, which has led to that epic moment that we all saw, where the statue of Colston was thrown into the river in Bristol. It's a very difficult moment for us all. It's highlighted many problems in the UK. The fact that some people were more concerned about the welfare of a statue than actually confronting the history of colonialism and racism in our nation's past. We also have the issue and the problem of institutional racism that still exists. If you're Black, you're 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched compared to your white counterparts. I've experienced racism myself in my own life. For example, I remember when I was at school telling my career guidance counselor that I wanted to study medicine, only for her to take a step back, give me a look and said, I think you need to consider something else. Racism has far-reaching impacts. And this is a moment for us to come together and to shout quite clearly that Black Lives Matter, but not only to protest, but to demand change. We do not need another review, another inquiry. What we need is change backed by legislation. For example, having reform of our judicial system, having a look at the powers that police possess to stop and search at will. This change will only come about if we continue to campaign, we continue to shout loudly, and we continue to protest. This is a really important conversation that we're having. And I want to bring this back to the Labour Party. The Labour Party is, as we know, one of the strongest vehicles for progressive change our nation has ever seen. And what we need is to ensure that going forward into the 2024 general election, that we have a set of policies that will begin to remedy some of the institutional and structural racism that exist. So what the challenge I will pose to many of us in this call today is to not only go out and march, but demand change from our MPs and to work internally within the Labour Party to ensure that when we form the next government, we can begin to dismantle the structures that continue to make our society so unequal. And it's important for us to continue to repeat the words that Black Lives Matter. Thank you for hosting this Labour Bame Network, and I really look forward to hearing the stories and hearing the views of those of you in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you. Our next panelist is Bisi Asundeko. And Bisi was the first councillor in St Helens, elected from an immigrant background. She's also a successful entrepreneur, winning the Mums Club Awards for being among the top 100 business mums in the UK. And she's a published author. So over to you now, Bisi.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Thank you. Yeah, it's really fantastic for me to be able to contribute to this discussion because as an immigrant, I feel that my lived experiences might be slightly different to some of the other speakers, knowing full well that a core part of my upbringing actually happened in Nigeria. And whilst I came into the UK to study for my master's, I feel that that was still a defining moment in my upbringing because I'd never left home up until that moment, and then came to the UK studying and then dating and every other thing, sort of like growing up, if you know what I mean, more of like a transition from like an adult. I was living with my parents to an adult. I was living on my own. I have to say that when Martin was speaking, I actually felt quite emotional because I really try my best not to relive what I saw. You know, the video where George actually died is a sort of video that's, okay, I sort of saw a picture and I said, oh, this is another violent sort of arrest or something. And I didn't want to watch it because I tried to control the sort of things that I internalize, if you know what I mean. But the more people talked about it, the more I got curious and I watched it and I was really, really deeply affected. And I have to say that even, you know, as Martin spoke about it, I just got really, really upset because George was not resisting arrest. He was not struggling. At that point, it was not even a threat. So I have to say that it shocked me to my core. And this is the reason why, even though I'm a councillor in a predominantly white town, and I kind of understand that some people will be uncomfortable with me talking about race, but I had to speak out. And since then, I have been speaking out, irrespective of the fact that some people will be uncomfortable. And I know that these discussions can be really, really uncomfortable, but we have to talk about it. Because I saw, you know, Martin in myself. I saw George in myself, not just because he's Black, but also because, you know, his experiences really mirror some of the things that some of us have been through. People say that racial profiling, sometimes all these microaggressions, it's almost as if your mind is playing tricks on you. You think, no, I don't think that security man is really looking at me. And you kind of really think, but how is it possible that I've had such a really strict upbringing up until the moment I came to the United Kingdom to study, very strict religious upbringing. You cannot even steal a piece of biscuit from a classmate, you know, you'll be disciplined. And suddenly I'm seen as a threat. I cannot go to a shop peacefully to sort of like buy something with my own money. I literally have to be stalked. From the moment I get into the shop to the moment I leave, I literally have to be stalked. And this has continued for so many years, such that I've literally become so used to it. And sometimes I would just smile, you know, just trying to just sort of make light of the situation. But there was a particular day I decided to speak up. And on that particular day, it was quite obvious that in that shop, I was the only Black person and I was literally just singled out. And this security man kept looking at the receipt, but he didn't find anything, nothing incriminating and all that. I was so uncomfortable because it was so obvious that he picked me out of, you know, every other person. And it was so obvious I was the only black shopper. And then I asked him, what exactly are you looking for? You know, I've paid, this is my trolley. And then he kept looking at it and looking at me. And then at the end, he didn't even say sorry for wasting my time. And he just asked me to go. And I said, well, I'm not leaving. I request that your manager comes and sort of like, I need to put in a complaint that you've wasted my time for no absolute reason. You've just racially profiled me. And I was so annoyed because at that point, that was the first time I had to speak out because I was so uncomfortable. And I just said to myself, well, this is no longer a joke. And I just said to myself that I really needed to speak out. So I called for his manager because I think some of us, due to being immigrants, it is hard sometimes to realize that your rights as humans, you know, your human rights is the same as the next person who is white. So it's important that anytime we feel that we've been unfairly treated, we definitely must speak out. Look at the ID of that security man and write a report. Maybe you can go to the website of the company or something, or ask for the manager. And the manager came and then apologized and said there was absolutely no reason, because actually she recognized me as a regular shopper and said, there is no reason why you should have been stopped, and apologized. And I was really, really upset that day. And I actually made up my mind that I was not going to go back into that shop to buy something. But I realized that this happens time and time again. You're seen as a threat just because of the color of your skin. And this also just ties into my experience on a particular day. I visited a friend. I thought it was a regular hospital. Then I realized there was a mental health hospital. I was shocked that majority of the people I saw were Black. And I was like, wow, I'm trying to understand why, even though we live in a multicultural society, and you go to a mental health hospital, but majority of the people who are there are Black. And I think this sort of like led to me trying to research it and actually realize that there are disparities in the mental health, you know, profiling, how people are locked up and things like that, because it was actually quite obvious that something really needed to be done. And this actually prompted me researching and finding out that even this charity Mind even published a paper in 2018 and made major recommendations about the disproportionate number of people from Black and ethnic minority that are detained under the Mental Health Act. It's just something about looking at our men, tall and muscular, as threats. You know, just something really has to be done about the stereotypes. Something really has to be done.
Thank you so much, Bissy. Thank you. I just want to remind everybody, and it's so great that we've got so many people that have joined this discussion, that we don't want to have an event where we're talking at you. We want people to contribute, even in the chat, with discussions on points that they want to raise, or if they're feeling like they want to contribute to the event, please raise your hands, and we'll try and get as many people as we can to speak. Our next panelist is Callum Anderson. Callum is a member of the Labour Bame Network Steering Committee and was formerly parliamentary candidate in Bedfordshire South West. So now over to you, Callum. Please share your experience.
Thanks to Mariana, and thanks everyone for coming on the call. It's great to see almost 50 people online now. I guess my USP for this conversation is that I'm mixed race for a start. I didn't grow up in a city, or including London. I grew up in a small market town in Bedfordshire. So I actually was able to stand in the area that I grew up in last December. I was also an only child, so very much opposite experience to Abdi. But I was also product of a single parent household. Although I did have a stepfather who actually, or I do have a stepfather who actually worked, was a police officer for 30 years in the UK. And so my kind of, my feelings when I think about the policing both in the UK and the US, although, you know, there are many, you know, many differences, there are also similarities. And, you know, we've all seen, you know, recent, you know, cases, you know, whether that be Mark Duggan or Sarah Reid, where, you know, the police obviously haven't behaved as they should do. And I always think of the, you know, the Robert Peel's principles of policing. One of them, you know, one of the big kind of major principles are that, you know, one of the big quotes rather is that the police are the public and the public are the police. And I think that's, you know, that written over, you know, almost 200 years ago, I think is quite, I think a powerful statement. And I think we have to consider when we're talking about all of our institutions is that they aren't just bodies independent of us, of our communities. We have the power to change them. And look, I've been pretty lucky in the sense that, you know, the byproduct of not living in a big city, in a big urban centre, such as London, is that you don't get, and I didn't face many of the, you know, stop and search challenges or the kind of what you would say traditional systemic racisms, but rather it was more facing the, I guess what I'd call the middle class racisms. So for example, obviously my mother is a white woman and I am not white. And so when I was very, very young, you know, a lot of generally, I think concerned elderly people, white people, would often ask my mum, you know, if she was pushing me around in the town centre, whether I was hers, or whether, you know, or would praise her for having adopted, you know, taken me on board. As time went on, you know, a lot of the challenges were then around comments, you know, or rather, you know, misuse of certain terms. So, you know, certainly in the first, say, 12, 13 years of my life. So, you know, often term coloured or half caste were kind of bandied about. And I think it's only when you kind of, you know, when I'm kind of as an adult, you only realise, certainly on the latter, quite how offensive it is. For those of you who don't know, caste is Latin for purity. And so, you know, basically you're saying, you know, the message is technically saying if you ever label anyone that's you're half pure, which, you know, is obviously pretty offensive. I think as I went through school, I think for me, you know, whilst you don't have the systemic racism I said earlier, I think what you don't have is that you don't have the community aspect. You're not, you know, I was in the street, in my street, I was the only person of colour in the whole street. In classrooms at school, certainly for the first, I'll probably say up until high school, I'd be the only person of colour in the class. You know, sometimes depending on the lesson, there might be, you know, one or two others, but otherwise you were kind of quite alone. You know, you're quite alone in that aspect. And the other challenge for them is that then you don't see, you know, when people talk about what they want to be when they grow up, you know, you know, if you want to be a doctor or you want to be a lawyer or a businessman, whilst I didn't have, you know, what Martin suffered saying, you know, maybe you should change something else, there wasn't actually there wasn't the suite of role models, but you know, that's the example that you can follow. And I think kind of partner to that is then the sense of belonging. And I think, you know, we'll talk later about how we can policy proposals about how we kind of, you know, build, you know, close down those inequities. And I think before we even start to challenge that, I think we also need to be thinking about what we're learning and you know, what our children are learning. That when I was growing up, you know, I did history up to A level and I didn't learn once about the British Empire. I know I think my understanding, having spoken to others, is that some people do learn about it, but I learned little to no history about the British Empire and or about Black history in general. You know, I think I did a module in civil rights you know, before A level. And I think as we challenge those different inequities, whether that's in our criminal justice system, in our mental health, how we kind of tailor mental health provisions to certain groups, I think it's really important that we are, you know, not erasing history, as some people have said, but actually really giving people a full, holistic education about all the types of people, whether that's Mary Seacole, whether that's the, you know, 20,000 West Indian soldiers that, you know, alongside other peoples in the Commonwealth, you know, India or Pakistan, when they were fighting for Britain's freedoms in both of the world wars, that's part of British history. It's not a separate, segmented history. That it's actually beginning part of the whole of British history. And so I think when we, you know, we'll talk about it later, and I'm sure a lot of you will have really good ideas about what we need to do. But I think we need to be asking a lot more of our employers. You know, anyone who's been on LinkedIn in the last week has probably been under siege from lots of people saying about how they are listening and how they're, you know, the black squares. But we actually need to be challenging FTSE 100 companies, big employers, about what they're going to do to help, alongside making sure that, you know, all of our children are being taught a really genuine history of the UK. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. We're now going on to Amina Ali. Amina is a Tower Hamlets councillor, and she's a member of the Health and Adult Scrutiny Subcommittee. She was representing Tower Hamlets quite recently at the removal of the Robert Milligan controversial statue, and has been an activist for many, many years, trying to change the culture from within at Tower Hamlets and East London as a whole. So I'll now go over to Amina. Please share your experience with us. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm Amina Ali. Thank you for that introduction. So my background is, before becoming councillor and getting into public life, I was a journalist. I also worked in law, and I worked in Parliament as well. And I've held about 3 cabinet positions in cabinet in the local authority. So I've sort of been around the block a bit. I want to really talk a bit about the changes I feel growing up black in Britain. So I'm ethnically Somali, like Abdi, but my experience is very different. So many of you may know that Somali communities, Abdi also did say, came to the UK as refugees in large numbers in the 90s because of civil war. But there was a community that predated the refugee Somali community, and that's a community I hail from. My family have been here since the 1930s. They were seafarers, which is obviously why the removal of the statue of the Docklands is quite significant to me. They worked on the docks in the East End, they worked in the docks in Liverpool, Cardiff, and they were part of the Black, African and Caribbean hidden community that existed pre-Windrush. That was the communities that were there. So that's where I come from. So my experience very much is growing up in the 70s and the 80s and again 90s. And also, unlike many of the panelists, I'm also parents. So I'll try and talk about a perspective of being a parent to young adults as well. So growing up in the 70s, obviously it was a time when, as many of us know, political correctness did not exist. It was very blatant. Racism was in your face. It was raw. I grew up in the 70s as a young child wanting to be white. I'm sure many black girls did. We saw whiteness as beauty. We all wanted blonde hair and blue eyes. I remember when the film Roots came out, suddenly we saw, for me, that was my first time of understanding what slavery was. I hadn't even known it had existed up to that point. And again, going to school, we were tormented. Africa was seen as a very bad place. There were references to Tarzan, going back to the jungle and all the rest of it. And so that was a very, very harsh time to be black, because everything around us was saying black was bad, and you didn't want to be black. Fast forward to the 80s, the East End, Tower Hamlets, was a very white East End. And now the word multicultural exists. It didn't exist in those days. In the 80s, growing up in Tower Hamlets was a very white, working class, raw community. And my school, the black community was small, the Asian community were quite small as well. And so people were very racist, and the majority of racism, unfortunately, was towards the Asian community. The National Front marched through the East End quite a lot, going through Brick Lane and other parts just to attack the Asian community. And the black community and Asian community were quite in alliance at the time. I mean, I was quite young politically. For me, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that they were these racist thugs that would march through our borough every once in a while. But behind that, there was a lot of the civil rights movement in Britain going on. A lot of the alliances between the Asian community and the word black becoming very political and engulfing Asians as well as black people. A lot of that was going on at the time. School, again, the usual, where if you went to a poor school, even if you went to, I suppose, a good school, if you're black, you were not expected to go far. I mean, funny enough, lots of my teachers now, kind of their jaws drop. The fact that I've actually am now a counsellor in the very secondary school. I'm a counsellor warden of the very secondary school I went to, where the teachers actually had no hope of someone like me ever becoming a counsellor or doing anything worthwhile. It just didn't exist at all. My old brothers were part of the Brixton riots, so we very much identified ourselves as black. It was black British. There was no Afro-Caribbean, no African. You were just black in the 80s. That was it, hardcore black. And my brothers would go part of the Brixton riots. They took part in that because they were being stopped and searched and all the rest of it. Fast forward to 90s, suddenly political correctness comes along and we're all being given labels. So you're Afro-Caribbean, you're Somali, you're this, you're that, and the segregation and separation within the black community starts in the 90s. And so you had this identity of being black, and then suddenly you're being told, actually, you're not black enough, you're a Somali, you're not really the right kind of black. And on top of that, oh yeah, you've got Islamophobia as well because you're Muslim. So gosh, you know, you're really struggling now, aren't you? Stand over there, please. So all these labels, and you suddenly have this great identity crisis. And I always say that I feel more British or English when I leave England. When people hear you speak and they're like, hey, you're English. And every day you have to answer the question, where are you from? Where do you come from? And in that one question, it's you do not belong here. We all feel it. Everybody on here, I think, has come across that once, twice, even more in their lifetime. It's insulting. It's insulting to our families that live here. It's insulting to us who see ourselves as British. And it's insulting to contribution our ancestors made and that we make on a daily basis. And that's quite difficult. So I'm really angry that I have to now have this conversation. I had in the 80s, I had in the 90s at uni, and suddenly now I'm having it with my young children, my adults children, young adult children who are going through the same things I went through. And it saddens me because I never thought that, I think in the 90s we lived in a kind of illusion. Maybe it was New Labour, I don't know what it was. There was a bit of an illusion that things had moved on a bit, you know, and blacks were doing okay and Asians were doing okay. You know, we're okay. There was a bit of that going on. But the reality is, under the austerity, the inequality that black communities have has really become clear. And one last thing really I want to talk about is Bame. I think the whole Bame acronym is a big problem. We've all been put under one box that we all tick called Bame. We all have very different experiences inside that Bame label. And I think that's become a way for policymakers to become lazy, to not really look at different communities and their different needs. And suddenly also the Black, Asian, ethnic minority communities, we are not seen through the lens of class. We don't have a class. So many of us who have done well, who would be seen if we were white as middle class, many of us who would be seen as professional and in terms of social mobility have done very well, we're invisible. We're all seen as people who need saving by some kind of government somehow. And, you know, that's a big problem, I think, with the whole Bame thing, because we're not seen through the lens of class, we're seen the lens of race. So, you know, that's maybe a debate for another day. But that's really it. So again, just really wanted to round up by saying about the statue. So as I said, going back to the beginning, my father was a seafarer. So that statue really was an insult to the slaves, you know, and the slavery industry that was built on the docks of the East End. And I walked past her again today, funny enough, because I wanted just to look around, and I saw, you know, the statue was outside the museum itself, which is an insult because the museum has a really good slavery exhibition inside there. And along there, it was all about the glory of the docks, this glory of this wonderful docks, which is great. But on whose back were those docks built? You know, talk about the sugar story, the sugar slavery, not slavery, slavery and sugar, and the sugar trade. On whose back? And I think Britain now needs to be ready for a proper raw conversation about race, about where we fit in. And I really want this momentum that started with Black Lives Matter to really make a difference, because I don't want to be here having the same conversation with my grandchildren about this issue. And sadly, it worries me that I will have to have that conversation, because I think Britain has a real problem with race. And unless we really address it properly, it's not going to go away. And we, as a Black and ethnic minority communities, we need to also address the issue within our own communities that we have, and then be united in challenging people who don't look like us as well. That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've seen so many people actually nodding, shaking their heads, me included. And so much that you've said resonates. I remember as a small child, every weekend you get dressed up in your African finery and you get teased by West Indian boys calling you African bulla, the same ones that would try and court you 10 years later when you're of age, but that's a different story. Yes, so there is a lot of diversity within our diverse community, and that's something that actually the Labour Party needs to take notice of, where although we choose to use this term BAME, we're not a homogenous group. So thank you very, very much for your contribution, Amina. Our final panelist is, I must admit I'm a bit biased because he's a fellow councillor in Lambeth, Mohammed Hashi. He's been recognised for his work in South London. And has been awarded. Sorry, can you hear me? Sorry, I was hearing an echo. Sorry. He's been recognised for his work in the South London press, who's awarded him our Heroes Award and featured in the Independent on Sunday Happy 100 list. Hashi has got an honorary doctorate in philosophy by the London Metropolitan University, and for his recognition for his outstanding work with young people and the wider local community. In 2018, Mohammed Hashi became the first elected Somali chair councillor in Lambeth, representing Stockwell, and has won a national award, the LGIU Councillors Achievement Award, in just 6 months into his new role. He's also the founder of the Brixton Soup Kitchen. So Hashi, please share your experience with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariana. Again, thank you very much for all the speakers and everyone here. Amina, thank you very much. Jazakallah khair. Again, that's the first line that I just wrote on what I was saying, because I think the issue with BME is not all Black experiences are the same, let alone different ethnic minority experiences. And one of my earliest experiences was when I moved into Stockwell in 1989 at just 5 years old. And that was, 6 years old, sorry, my maths is a bit bad. And that was really like my first real memorable experience. And that was of the young kids on the estate coming over. They were mainly West Africans and Caribbean, and coming over and saying, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Somalia." And they said, "No, India." And I was really confused. I said, "No, Somalia." And they said to me, "No, India." And in 1989, that was a year and a half before the Civil War kicked off, and we were plastered all over the TV and identifiable by, you know, the kind of malnutrition of the skinny body, and, you know, the big head and the flies on our face and all the poverty and famine associated with that. And it was at that point where, you know, we started to become accepted as a people that can have an identity, which for me was interesting because that experience didn't come from white people. For me, that experience came from within the community, again, that we're kind of entrenched and really involved in now. And that was exactly as Amina was just saying, is that exact situation. I'm just going to start with, I grew up in Stockwell, went to a local school. The secondary school, we had 5 head teachers in 5 years. So every year our head teacher got sacked. Every year our head teacher got sacked. Out of 240 of us, 7 of us got 5 A to Cs. So it was, what we was encouraged to do wasn't aspire. We wasn't encouraged to succeed. We wasn't even really being encouraged to survive, if I'm honest with you. It was just about see what you can do. Again, by the grace of God, I went to a grant maintained school in Tooting called Graveney. That totally blew my mind because of the culture shift. These kids, I remember walking to my first chemistry lesson, and I went and sat at the back, and everyone sat at the front. So I was left by myself thinking, what's going on? And my mum, up until today, reminds me, I came home after that first day and said to her, "Mum, I don't like this school. These kids, they're not normal. Like, they seem to be enjoying what's going on in school." And for me, even when we're talking about race, it was interesting because growing up, I never identified race as one of the things that was an issue to me, because it was so entrenched. You know, it was confusing when you're a black male. You know, I had a beard growing from quite a young age. So I was easily identifiable as a Muslim, especially because I prayed 5 times a day and everyone got to see that. I'm coming from an area of poverty. So I don't know if why I was being targeted. And that was interesting because growing up, then you start to figure out how things work. I ended up going into uni. I went, done my first degree in biomedical science at London Metropolitan University. Because I'm Muslim, I didn't take a student loan, so I've done 4 jobs, 7 days a week for 4 years in order to get through that. I ended up doing a PGCE to become a science teacher. I've done a master's in forensic science, and then in 2016 I got honorary PhD. I'm a director of 2 award-winning companies. The main one being the Bricks Soup Kitchen, that helps homeless people and people that are struggling or suffering. We won a lot of awards, but again, by the grace of God, from the South London Press to Black Inspiration Award to the Greater Heights. We were celebrated by the Evening Standard 3 years in a row as the top 1,000 influential Londoners, and I think it was topped off by my appointment as a councillor in Lambeth. But let me contrast that quickly, because I've done every single thing that my mum ever told me. Well, most things, if I'm honest with you. And, you know, I was never in a gang. I've never been involved in criminality. You know, I stuck with the right crowd. I've done everything that I felt I was supposed to do. And, you know, the connotation was that if you do these things and you stay away from these things, you will get success. However, in 1999, at the age of 15, I was the victim of a stabbing in Brixton as a result of an attempted robbery that I decided to fight back in. And in 2008, actually, during the time frame where I was a teacher at a school, while breaking up a fight, I ended up being a victim of a shooting. So I got shot in my shoulder. The bullet hit my shoulder, cut the nerve to my whole arm, shattered my rib hit my lung, collapsed my lung, and the bullet stopped half a centimeter away from my spine. I was off work for 6 months. Now, as if that wasn't enough, I was vilified in the media. They turned around and said I had an argument with a group of 16-year-olds in a chicken shop, which was quite embarrassing for me because I'm a youth worker, you know, and I'm thinking, oh, there goes my street cred. All the kids are going to think I'm scared of them. You know, I got vilified by my own community. So I used to work with the hardest to reach and engage young people in school. And a lot of the parents actually started writing into the head teacher saying, oh, why have you employed a gang member? I heard he got shot in a drug deal gone wrong. His enemies came out of prison and shot him. I was involved in a gun battle where I was shooting back, which was horrible, especially considering I was in intensive care actually trying to survive. And the police, they attended the hospital on the day that I got shot while I was in intensive care. And despite all the tubes in my face, they tried to get a statement out of me without me using words, which was a really interesting scenario, if I'm honest with you. So thankfully, I recovered. The head teacher turned around and actually gave me an extension to my contract. She had so much faith in me. And so she gave me an extra year extension. I got paid while I was still off. And I retained my position, which I'm eternally grateful for, because, again, So considering what she could have done for me, it was weird, because the people that were accusing me of these things didn't even know me. Actually took 5 years for me to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. You know, so for that whole 5 years, I was hyper vigilant. I was hyper aggressive. I was constantly on my toes, believing something bad would happen to me, simply because I existed, if that makes sense. And that's really exhausting. But interesting part was, I remember constantly getting stopped by armed police. And you can imagine that kind of trauma that's kind of supporting, because they were stopping me with guns, and it was always hard stops, which meant that they would point the gun, skid their car in front of you, shouting at all directions to get you on the floor. And it was really started to get to me because it was almost daily. And I went on to find out that I actually had 12 gun tags associated with my car, which meant every time they ran my plates, they said I was suspected of being involved in 12 different shootings. And that was primarily because of the youth work that I was doing at the time, which meant that I engaged with a lot of young people on the estates. So they would just see my car and say, oh, he looks suspicious, and put in information. But also the most interesting part of that was the fact that one of the shootings I was suspected of being involved in was my own. Now, I say these things because that was my experience. And at the time, I didn't necessarily feel like it was because I was black. I just thought to myself, oh, you know, you're kind of taught to trust in the system. You know, the system's fair, and it's not a person. It's enshrined in legislation, and people are held accountable to it. And I started to feel like that wasn't true. And for me, what was interesting is what was worse than being black, and I think it's still true now, is being young and black. And for me, even when we look in the newspapers and the media that we get all our information from, the question is, how accurate are these things and what picture they're trying to paint? So the public image of young people, for example, last year, the media reported, and this is statistically correct, there was about 135 murders in the capital last year. And every single time there was a murder, you'll see a young person, 7th young person to be knifed to death, or 9th murder. And, you know, it's all this connotation associated with our young people. But when you looked at the statistics, out of 135 murders, 49 was of young people under the age of 25. And just 36 was people under the age of 21, which is what I class as young people. And this include Abdi Ali, who was found in the loft of dead in the loft of an elderly white couple. It includes 11-week-old Lily, who was found non-responsive in the house. Such things not necessarily related to violence or even gang membership. But the way it was put to us, it has even led us, people within our own community, to look at our kids with a bit sideways and say, look, you're a threat, without knowing anything about them. And I think that's one of the worst things that has come out of this whole kind of environment that's been created. Again, according to statistics, if we look at more about our attack on our young people, just being black, as if just being black weren't enough, or we've got a third of 19-year-olds don't have a level 3 education. Black residents are 4 times more likely to be unemployed. Again, that includes young people. 1 in 3 of our children in Lambeth is born directly into poverty, which is shocking. A child born in a poor borough is likely to live 8 years less than someone born in a wealthy borough. You're 300 times more likely to be overweight if your parents are overweight. And we know we have a real problem in our community. So for me, it's quite a harrowing experience that we're going through. But I really wanted to end this on more of a positive note in terms of what we can do. So I feel like, especially with this whole, you know, the murder of George Floyd, we know it's not the first time a black man's been murdered, but this for me feels different. And for me, as a result of that, I'm hopeful. However, I don't feel that hopeful if we don't act properly, if we don't take advantage. So I always like to look at our community's response. What is our responsibility? How do we hold people to account? And I'm really happy to hear of how many, you know, parliamentary candidates that we have in the group just now, you know, who come from our background. But it's also really sad that they're not MPs right now, you know, and, you know, it could be because of a number of issues. But for me, we have to keep our finger on the pulse. Again, one of the things that really helped me in terms of my journey was I wanted to understand how the system worked. So when I kept getting stopped and searched, I think the final straw for me was an officer on a bike pulled up to me outside of McDonald's in Brixton. And at the time I was a science teacher and I had 2 students who went in to go and get some food. Please don't judge me on the health side of things. And the officer rides up to me and says to me, "All right there, mate?" Now, as a young person growing up in Brixton, that was quite weird, you know. Police officers didn't talk to you like that. We didn't have that relationship. So I said, "Right." And he said to me, "Going to be doing any stabbings today?" And it genuinely made me laugh because he caught me so off guard with that. And I said to him, "Actually, I'm a science teacher waiting for my students to come out so I can continue tutoring." And his response was, "Oh my God, well, you know, there's lots of stabbings and shootings going over here." And I just thought to myself, how do I stop this? You know, and at the time I got introduced to a guy called Wesley Stevenson, who was the chair of the CPCG, or Community Police Consultative Group. And I attended one of the meetings and I saw at the top table, we had the borough commander, he had the leader of the council at the time, and a lot of other influential people. And I could just see how the interaction was going and him holding them to account. This literally led me to after that, I got on every single board possible. So I became the vice chair of the Independent Advisory Group to Lambeth Police. I became the the chair of the Stop and Search Monitor Group. I became the chair of the Pan London Stop and Search Community Monitor Network, which looks after stop and search across London. I sit on 5 advisory groups at Scotland Yard, including Public Order, TSG. I'm also the vice chair of the Trident Independent Advisory Group at Scotland Yard. And for me, one of the things I always say to people in the community is that without being involved and sitting at the seats of power where these policies are suggested and debated before they're put into stone. Because it seems to me that, especially within our community, where we only become vocal when things get passed, which is not a great thing to do. But we have to also remember, in Lambeth, for example, we have approximately 320,000 residents. Of that, the council has accepted 27% as living on the poverty line or just under, with the highest rates of youth violence, highest incidence of mental health, highest rates of HIV, second highest rates of teen pregnancy. And as I've said previously, 1 in 3 children is born into poverty. So you can imagine families going through this whole myriad of issues. Prioritizing membership in panels is not really what they're doing. We expect people in our community to thrive when they're still struggling to survive. And I feel like there's a big understanding that has to come from that, not just from the establishment, but also us who represent a lot of people in our communities. I think at this time we need inspirational leadership, you know, but it also feels like everyone's trying to be a leader, as if there's no positions apart from leadership. We don't really see within our communities the capturing of data to be shared with everyone. We're not really seeing that kind of core organization. It shouldn't take the murder of George Floyd for us to realize what kind of situation we're in. And for me, I'm really, really bolstered and positive because of some of the people in this group just sharing their experiences, hearing what they've gone through and what they've gone on to achieve. But again, we also have to value our community. You know, just again, apologies, I am a bit biased because I really do love Lambeth and think it's the best bar in the world. However, I will balance that by actually giving examples. So in Lambeth, we've got an ex-gang member. And as a youth worker, I've done youth work since 2000. This guy was so active in terms of criminality. And his name is Carl Loco. And, you know, he was one of the few people that was invited to Prince Harry's wedding, you know? And guess what? The newspapers couldn't let him live. All they had on the newspaper as a title, typical of the Daily Mail, obviously, they had from gang leader to Prince Harry's inner circle. And I thought, why can't you just celebrate? You know, we've got David Bowie, who comes from Brixton. We've got a former mayor in terms of John Major, you know, at least it wasn't Margaret Thatcher, right? We've got former London mayor Ken Livingstone, who used to live in Brixton. Got people like Dylan White. We've got a Liverpool player, Nathaniel Klein, who I actually used to be my vice captain for my youth club team, you know. And we've got so many resources in our community, but sometimes it feels like politics makes us so insular that we forget to involve people that are not political. Even me, before I became a councillor, I had only voted twice. And one of those votes was for myself, if I'm being totally honest. So even now, I don't think I'm that politically astute in terms of the inner workings of, you know, different factions and different political parties and opinions on policies, etc. But for me, I feel like there's a level of purity we have to keep. And that purity comes from honesty and experience. We have to continue to listen to our communities and actually represent them. None of the positions that we occupy should be for ourselves. And sometimes in my experience, I found when you get to, you know, panels and positions of influence, it becomes very obvious that you start seeing less and less brown faces. And sometimes we want to feel special and we want to be, you know, I'm the only, you know, for me saying I'm the first Somali councillor in Lambeth in 2018 wasn't something I celebrated. It was something that really brought sadness to me because I thought, as Somalis, we've been here since the 1940s and it's taken until 2018 for us to get representation here. Now, the question is, are there blockers or is there a lack of involvement and wanting to engage? And I think it's both. And I think we can't try and work on one side of the problem and leave the other alone. We have to make sure we kick down the doors of opportunity, but also make sure we begin to populate ourselves and become active and present when these things are happening. I just wanted to leave on 2 points, or maybe 3 points. So first quote was, the real tragedy behind poverty is what it does to your hopes and dreams. And for me, again, I think it feels like being Black and living in poverty has become synonymous. And that's something we need to break because we have so many brilliant people and we've got so much to bring to the economy. We just have to be brave and start supporting each other properly. next quote is, the real tragedy of the poor is the poverty of their aspirations. And again, for me, it's not always about money. It's about instilling hope in our young people, and hope through our example in how we address things and how we strive and get through things. And I feel like every single one of us has got a story, and sometimes we forget that there are people that we can't see that are depending on us and putting their kind of hopes on how much success we can exhibit. So there's a bigger responsibility than just us in terms of what we're striving to do. And the final one, I think this is something that we should be pushing out to wider society, is that of course our communities have gone through extensive trauma, you know, and I don't have to continue to say, because, you know, if I talk about slavery as this, if it was in the past, I feel like it's just done differently. And for me, we shouldn't just see the trauma the community has gone through, but also look at the amount of resilience that we've had to build to survive it. You know, we've developed and harnessed so much negativity and turned it positive. We're an amazing people. And I think it is more than time for us to be exhibiting that to wider society. So I think every single one of us in this room now that's listening to these conversations, we should be taking that away and making sure that we shine as bright as we possibly can, because without us, the next generation they'll be growing up in darkness. Thank you, Mariana.
Thank you so much. He's an amazing guy, he really is. And I think it's actually woeful that we've celebrated 33 years of having Diane Abbott and Paul Boateng and Bernie Grant as MPs, and we've moved from 2 black MPs to 3 in all this time. And I look forward to the day that I get the invite from Hashi to come and see him in Parliament as an MP. I'm going to move on to take some contributions from we've got some really fantastic people that have given up their evening to come and share with us. So I'm going to come to another inspirational character who I got the chance to get to know slightly when I was on the NEC election 2 years ago. I'm going to hand over to Gurinder Joshan to just share very briefly with us and give us some inspiration and tell us about particularly about policy that you think we should be focused on.
Hi, thanks, Mariana. And I'll tell you what, I've just been so inspired listening to all the personal stories from all the speakers. But, you know, Hashi just kind of blew it out of the water there. I think he's fantastic, his experiences, but also what he's actually saying as well. And I just wanted to kind of, I don't want to repeat what everybody said, and there's a lot been said about racism generally in society and stuff. But I want to say a little bit about the Labour Party and where I see some of the problems are there. And I think that they actually they reflect the wider problems in society. So we've heard people talk about how this is, you know, the generation after generation, we find ourselves in the same situation, fighting racism, and you know, and it's almost like a cyclical thing, where you start, you know, something like George Floyd happens, it arouses a lot of anger. People come out on the streets, and then authorities start writing reports and you know, and stuff like that. But actually, nothing really changes. And then what happens is, generation after generation, the same thing is happening again and again and again. And I look around, you know, I look at the photos of people on this, and most of you are younger than me, you know, and so another generation have been inspired to, or have had to come up and set up a new organisation and organise and get active on the same, but the challenge is still the same. And in the Labour Party, it's the same as well. You know, I joined when I was 16, 32 years ago, and I going through some papers in the loft a couple of weeks ago, and I found a magazine, Labour Party magazine, and there was an article in there with a picture of me. After Black Section, they set up Black Socialist Society, and they had a conference in Leeds, and I was there in 1994. And yet, you know, things don't change. We're still talking about black organisation, and we're still talking about ethnic minority engagement in the party and representation and all these things. Are still, we seem to be stuck in that. But I think, and I look around, and hearing about the experiences and the things that some of the speakers are doing, but also, reading Sanchia, put all her list of stuff she's involved in on the chat and various other people. We've got the change makers in this chat, and I think part of the challenge is that we've got to activate people out there to become involved in these things. In some respect, we're preaching to the converted because we're already actively involved. But the challenge is now is I don't want my children growing up having to fight the same battles we're fighting now. So I think it's not just about, and Martin talked earlier about demanding change. I think it's more than that. It's about making change happen, and that's the thing. But we've got to be clever about it. So, when we're talking about statues, and the way I look at it, so, okay, you're talking about statues, and you're talking about heritage and things like that. So, that statue that was toppled obviously has a relevance to Anglo-centric history in the UK, but it has a similar relevance to Black people as well. And it's important that people understand all of that relevance. But you know what? More important than that is that we define what that means for our future generations. Because our future generations, Black, white, Asian, whatever, have got to live together, they've got to be neighbours, they've got to be work colleagues, they've got to, and if we can define that future, that's the more important thing than just the past. The past is important, but we've got to use that to define the future. And I think that's the change we've got to make happen. And whether it's in the Labour Party, whether it's outside, whether it's as councillors or activists or whatever committees and organisations you're involved in, I think that's where we've got to be taking the lead. We can't let other people define the future for us. We have to do that. And people in this room are all of you are actively involved in so many organisations, so many places, including the Labour Party. We can't let other people do this for us. And that principle of Black self-organisation is still the same. It's still as important today as it ever was. And in the time of the Black section, and that 33 years ago, that step change of getting those MPs elected came on the back of Black self-organisation in the Black section. We're not going to see another step change until we see that principle and people working together. So I'm really pleased that this group's come together. I think it's important. I also just want to say I think one of the things that's coming clear now at this time is the importance of terminology, and we all use the word Bame, but you know what, I think we do need to start putting our house in order, because when we look at inequalities exist for all of our communities, but there are different inequalities, and there are some Black communities, when you look at are more unequal than other communities in a lot of respects, in a lot of different fields. And we need to recognise that, we need to say it, and we need to recognise it. So I wrote an article yesterday, but instead of writing Bame everywhere, I put Black and Asian and minority ethnic. It made my article 3 times longer, but we've got to start doing it. We've got to start saying it, and we've got to start meaning what we say. So I'll leave it there, because I know you're...
Thank you so much, Scarinza. Thank you. I'm now going to go to Councillor Jackie Taylor, another real activist. So I look forward to your pearls of wisdom. It's nice to finally meet you, even if it's virtually. Thank you, Jackie.
Well, it's great to be here this evening, and it's great to meet all of you. Some of you are familiar faces to me. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, my name's Jackie Taylor, and I need to kind of tell you a little bit about myself and then bring you up to date, because my major issue, I share exactly what you guys are saying. My major issue is actually with regards to the Labour Party. So just a little bit about myself. I was brought up in a very paradoxical situation, part brought up in London, part brought up in the West Midlands, and I come from a really kind of poor background, where when I saw that footballer talking about free school meals, I knew exactly what he meant. Yeah. At the age of 17, I decided to settle here in the West Midlands, and all throughout my educational progress, I actually found it difficult to do my schoolwork and to learn. It was only at the age of 53 I found out that I was dyslexic. Throughout that time, I'd been to school, I'd done exams, did very poorly at exams, but I've ended up with a degree, so I'm a registered social worker. Now, I got into politics by accident, really, using all of my social work skills and nursing abilities, because I was a nurse as well. And when I became a counsellor, like Dr. Hashi, I was saddened to become the first African Caribbean counsellor in Sandwell, which borders onto Birmingham, a very diverse area of the West Midlands. I'm proud to say I'm still there with all the difficulties that I go through. Yeah, I know I make a difference. I know I particularly make a difference to the role of being Cabinet Member for Sustainable Transport. But that brings me to the problem I have with the Labour Party, because when I was called muck by a white colleague some years ago, muck, yeah, and I internalised that, and I internalised it so much because if I was to tell people who called me muck, they wouldn't believe it. They would say that I was lying, yeah? But actually, although I was extremely offended by that, I recognised that I was in the right place and I was doing the right thing and that I was a threat to people. You see, for me, all the negativity that's thrown at me, it just builds my resilience, yeah? And so here I am as a cabinet member having to dodge bullets in Sandwell. And I'm not talking about the bullets from street gangs. I'm talking about the bullets from the Labour Party. The wars that go on within the party is not my war. Yeah, it's not my war. I am a politician that's come into politics to serve disadvantaged people. I haven't come into politics to serve politicians. I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Just incredibly powerful, and I just want to say thank you, because I often find that as people of Black and Asian minority ethnic persuasion, we are moved from pillar to post, from whichever faction, to serve other purposes. Absolutely. Other than our own. Absolutely. So thank you for bringing that forward, because that's really powerful. Thank you. I'm now going to go to James Borg. I'm so sorry to everyone that's had their hands up or that requested to speak. This is obviously something that we need to come together and do more often, because so many people want to speak. But I'm going to go to James, who's been really patient, and then we'll see how many more we can fit in. So over to you, James.
Well, good evening, everyone. And as they say, follow that. I mean, how do you follow what Jackie just said right there? I think what you said was very powerful and very poignant, Jackie, in terms of serving politicians and serving narratives. But so thank you for that, and thank you for everyone who's spoken so far. I'm James Borg. I'm a Bame officer for Great Yarmouth CLP on the East Coast, originally from Dagenham in East London, and son of an immigrant from Malta in the southern Mediterranean near North Africa, if anyone knows where that is. And the reason why I wanted to speak was because everybody who's spoken so far has really sparked up something inside me, which, just sitting here, I'm going to try and keep it short, but I want to summarize, beginning with what Bissy said earlier on. I think I put it into the chat earlier on. The connotations between what Bissy said about the Mind paper that was published a few years ago, I think it was 2018, about how the implications of mental health on Black people specifically. I think that's what Bissy said. It reminded me of an article which I read yesterday in The Guardian. I'm not sure if anybody else saw it. It was to do with the coronavirus and the effects on Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people being disproportionately high. And the same roots which lead to mental health cases being so high in our communities, it's exactly the same. The article in The Guardian spoke of a clinician, leading clinician, who was on the front line treating coronavirus, saying that once patients from Bame, Black and Asian and minority ethnic communities come into the hospital, they react exactly the same as anybody else, which proves that it's nothing to do with genetics or nothing to do with, things that a lot of people are trying to say, dietary habits and whatnot. The reason why this is happening, coronavirus and mental illness happening so high, is because of disproportionately negative socio-economic factors which are leading people to be in there, not by any, but by choice, might I add, especially with what we've seen the last 10 years with austerity. Now, my second point was to come across to what Amina said, and I think Gurinder, you also spoke about it as well. The word Bame, the phrase Bame, it really needs to be looked into. I totally agree with that. And as a Bame officer, an elected Bame officer, and as someone who stood as a council candidate 3 times, unsuccessfully, I might add. I came at the wrong time during the Brexit era, which has just been horrible experience personally. It really needs to look into, because just as we've heard today, and also just to give you a little testimony from my own experience, I've been a psychology student for 15 years. I'm also a professional basketball coach. I work with different communities. Just in the Black community alone, there are Black communities. Everybody's different. Bissy, I think you said you were from Nigeria. You have Amina from a different part. I think it was a previous speaker from Somalia. Everybody's different, especially the comment that was made about the Afro-Caribbean society. Everybody's different, but for some reason they all get categorized into one pot. And then we all, from Bame backgrounds, get categorized even further, just to make everybody sort of feel a bit nice and rosy, like a sort of maple leaf, or like, a fig leaf, if you like. But the problem is, it needs to be looked into, because there are so many different issues. Everyone gets affected disproportionately in different ways. And also what our friend Dr. Hashi was saying earlier on as well, in terms of dealing with people who are coming from, especially young people who are coming from there. A lot of the people in our communities don't have the opportunities because of the socio-economic factors. And I just want to wrap up real quick, just to sort of say, especially when Hashi was saying about his quotations that were coming out. One popped into my head as well as I was listening to him speak so eloquently. Today's the birthday of Tupac Shakur. Some of you might know him. He's actually my favorite rapper of all time, one of my favorite artists ever. And he would have been 49 today. And his quotation, which sticks out in my mind from his famous song Changes, is learn to treat me as a brother instead of 2 distant strangers. And I think that's the thing which we all need to take away from this whole episode, and trying to reach out and trying to educate, because I think education is so important. When I was actually campaigning as a council candidate in Great Yarmouth, actually as a council candidate, I was shocked really to see just the amount of racism that exists. And although a lot of people were sort of talking about Brexit and about EU migration and whatnot, the racism towards our Black communities was even more, it became even more stark. And it was really shocking to see how it resonates in people, how it sort of festers. And I'll never forget this. One woman spoke and she said, "Oh, called me all these sorts of names, you liberal so-and-so," much more colorful language. She came out and spoke and she said, "Next door, we've got all these Jamaicans making all this noise and all this, all this noise." They weren't Jamaican. They were actually from the Afro-Portuguese community. I think they were from Guinea-Bissau. It just shows you just how blinded society really is, and why we need to really get our house in order. As Gurinder rightly said, we need to get out there and be active. So I would really, from this going forward, I would really love to see the Labour Party taking a lead on this, and really getting out and actively trying to campaign to educate, as well as to include more people, because a lot of people from our communities just don't feel affected like they can get involved in politics, and we really need to have that sorted out. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Okay. So how are we doing for time? Have we got time? Fantastic. Okay. So I'm going to go to biased again. I'm sorry. The Lambeth Posse's out in full force tonight. My wards colleague, Mohammed Sadet, please could you share with us very, very quickly?
Very quickly, Lambeth representing here. Thanks, Marianne, and thanks to everyone who organised today, and thanks, Marianne, for chairing. It's such a fantastic, safe space for us to speak candidly about how people are feeling, and the speakers have all been amazing, and it's been such a revealing evening for me especially. Even though I live in Lambeth, I live with Marianne, I live with Councillor Hashi in a work sense. But even then, I can only speak about their experiences. I've got no idea what it's like to be, as Hashi says, possibly the hardest thing in this country, to be a young Black guy, for example. But I had some reflections and some thoughts, and you know, since Brexit, I think, I don't know, I'm sure many of you feel similarly, which is whether or not we belong to this country anyway, based on what James just said about how closely tied a lot of people's Brexit opinions are with perhaps some of their perceptions of us, and whether we are really, I think Amina mentioned, you know, where are you really from, and whether that never ever actually went away. And I think since Brexit, especially, even in London, you've been feeling that to a certain extent. And now all of a sudden, something that happened, you know, thousands of miles away resonates really loudly, because it confirms even further all the paranoid thoughts in your mind about whether or not you really are meant to be living here, or whether you're on borrowed time or not. But I wanted to just I did some racial profiling on the Zoom call. I noticed there's quite a few Asian names in there, very backgrounds, and I want to just make some comment about, and I hope it doesn't land like a lead balloon. But it's been quite obvious the Tory party has been trying to pit Asians against the Black Lives Matter movement in general. You know, the way Priti Patel, the way she spoke to Florence that day, I was ready to smash my TV. I wanted to throw something at it. But I knew that what Priti was saying, I'm not speaking with her first name as if we're on first name terms, but the way she was speaking was actually reflective of something I've heard in our own communities often, which is, you know, why do black people have this chip on their shoulder? Slavery happened years and years ago. Why can't they just get on with it? And it's that mentality that Priti Patel was exhibiting. When she rolled her eyes at Florence like that, it was exactly that sentiment, which is sit down, just get on with it, stop moaning. You know, no one really cares that much about what you're talking about. Just get on with it. And I think that really is a challenge, especially in our Asian communities. You know, we just by suggesting, I've been called Paki many times. I'm not even Pakistani, I'm Indian, my wife's Pakistani, but I've been called Paki my entire life. I've had more racist incidents from other Asians than from white people, say. But I know that doesn't compare anything to the experience, say, Councillor Ashley has. I noticed he was sitting in his BMW. I don't know if he's been pulled over tonight. You know, there's a good chance he might be. He gets pulled over often, and you know, had a documentary on it. So I can't. It's very easy for the Bame umbrella to be used to pit one minority against another. It's a sort of classic. I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but it's such a classic sort of divide and conquer way of thinking about the world, and it just allows us to bicker amongst ourselves about whose racism is worse. And then it comes into perhaps our political discourse within the Labour Party. Well, we've ticked all our boxes. We've got lots of Bame people. You know, look at this Bame and look at that Bame as if we're walking tick boxes, as opposed to people with our own political viewpoints. And some of us have very left, and some of us are more centrist, some of us have even right wing, say. But, you know, we aren't just Bame tick boxes. And I think perhaps the Labour Party has been guilty of that. You know, the Labour Party has been guilty of saying, even in Lambeth, and I'm speaking candidly, Mariana, as you know, Brixton, for example, Lambeth has, quite a large West Indian population. Would you ever know that from looking at the councillors? Would you know that there's not a single, would you believe there's not a single black West Indian male councillor for years in Lambeth? How is that? How did that come to be? And I think then I go on to my second point, which is about the Labour Party and the power structures, and how important it is, like Councillor Ashley says, to really build up the next generation. If you've got a position of power, I was very fortunate, very privileged to be a cabinet member in Lambeth, which is, no mean feat, especially in the field of community safety. And I think, for those of us who have achieved that, and in Lambeth, many of us are now achieving that, actually see it as a temporary role. You're there not to tell everyone how great you are as a councillor or as a cabinet member, as much as you may be. Actually, your role is singular, and that's to get off cabinet as fast as you can, so that there's another group, another generation that's inspired enough to come along and take your place. And that, I think, as a black councillor, as an Asian councillor, it's so important then to be active within our local party. Quite often becoming a councillor, becoming an MP, it's all about who you know, and it's always going to be about who you know. It's never going to be about how good you are for the job. And I think the true equality will come like one day. I really hope one day we can be as good as a mediocre white guy. That's what I aspire to. Just be okay at something. But we know we can't just be okay at something. We've got to be extra good. And to recognize that doing that, it doesn't necessarily follow just because you are good at something, because of your professional life or your political life even, that you're going to get any position of political power. So, for anyone here listening, if you are able to get involved and build up power structures, get involved in the ethnic minority forums in Lambeth, I became councillor because of our ethnic minority forum. In fact, it was so successful about 14 people became councillors, 3 went
Me
on, or
too.
2 went on to become MPs. You know, Florence and Marsha Dikova, and he who shall not be named as well was an MP. You know, several people, several people became councillors and cabinet members. Several people attempted to and actually did become assembly members in London. So it became so important to have this network of people that you can rely upon, that you can call upon, both as mentors, but also as support when the time comes, when you need to go and say, when you need someone to give you support and feel confident enough to go and put yourself forward for any of these positions within the party. Because it's not a given. Just because you're political doesn't mean you're going to be confident enough to go and put yourself forward, because you'll always have that doubt. Am I good enough? And actually you are. You're more than good enough, I guarantee it. But sometimes you just need your fellow colleague to tell you that you are. And sometimes you need enough people in your corner to tell you that you are. So I'll leave on that note. It's been really inspiring this evening. But I hope we can all stay in touch together. And those of us who are councillors and MPs and whatnot, please do use your power. Please do use your privilege.
Oh, thanks, Mo. He always gives me hugs, and now he's given me a virtual hug again. Lovely. This evening has been quite cathartic. So we wanted it to be punchy and for us not to talk to ourselves and just, you know, for it not to be sob stories. And I hope it's been inspiring. And I hope also we can take it to the next stage. So let's think about what policies we would actually be pushing for the Labour leadership to really, if they're serious about actually listening and taking on board all the issues that we have about how we fit into and contribute to the Labour Party, what policy issues should we be putting forward? Because I think, you know, we need to start from looking at our own existing structures. And lots of people have alluded to the struggles that they faced within, say, being on different boards, getting onto boards, getting jobs, navigating their way through local government politics. Boy, that's a struggle. So what policies would people recommend? And please, can we have people either writing in the chats or anyone that wants to speak? We're trying to, we'll go over a little bit. We'll try not to keep everyone's stomach rumbling, but please come forward and contribute. Who wants to say something next? I'll keep on talking otherwise. Okay, I'm going to go over.
Sorry, Mary, I was going to say, I just wanted to come in just for a second, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's I think it's to do with like hope again. Because for me, again, it just brought back memories for me. I'm sitting just in Clapham in my car doing this because this is where I get the best reception in the borough. And this is exactly where I sat. So on Monday, I done an article with the Evening Standard around stop and search. And I've been stopped since I was young. I think it's over 60 times, but I was being a bit moderate. In the paper, I said 60 times. And I put the link in the chat as well. And it's interesting. I sat in this car. You know, I've been the chair of the Stop and Search Monitor Group for 6 years. I was the chair of the Pan London Group for 3 years. And I was actually a councillor of this area. This is Orlando Road. And the police pulled me. They didn't pull me over. Similar. And I'm quite interested to see if it might even happen today. You know, and the police knocked on my window. They said they wanted me to come out for drugs. And I asked them what their grounds were. What reasonable grounds have you put together? And they said to me, looking me in my face, you look young and your car looks expensive, so we feel like you might be a drug dealer. Simple as that. Now that represents an illegal stop, because that you can't use none of those criteria as part of your grounds gathering. But despite the fact that I said that to the officer, despite the fact that they had it on camera, they persisted. I asked them how old I was. They didn't know how old I was. I asked them how much the car cost. They didn't know how much the car cost, which should have meant their grounds disappeared. And of course, it carried on. I came out of the car. They put me in cuffs straight away. They held me in the police van for a lot longer than they really should have. But for me, I wasn't disheartened. And the reason why I wasn't disheartened is because I sit on all these police panels, especially the group of police I sit on an advisory group at Scotland Yard with that actual group. So I knew there was going to be consequences to the actions and an opportunity to actually, you know, despite the fact that I might look young when I get a haircut, and the way I dress in tracksuits because that's how comfortable and that's how I've grown, that you shouldn't feel like you can just look at someone and decide who they are and feel there's no consequences. And one of the things that I just wanted to reiterate again is the fact that when we do this work and when we represent people, when we lead by example, it's not something that's going to be overnight. You know, it's not, it potentially might not even be something within our generation that people see the benefits from. And I think it's sad to have to continue to use this advice. But again, I'll use a quote from the Quran. It says, وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, which is encourage each other in righteousness, but also encourage each other in patience. Because sometimes just being righteous doesn't mean you're going to get what you feel you should deserve morally. A lot of the time, you also have to be patient to believe in the systems and trust that the systems will change. And with hard work and with hope and with good manners and good characteristics, that this is things will get better. And for me, it's been a constant reminder for me, the fact that I could be sitting here in this group right now, talking to everyone, and police will turn up at the window and I'll just be turning the camera like that and say, look. And where it used to upset me, it doesn't upset me anymore, because I know I'm in a position where I can affect change and make sure there are consequences to actions like that, and that hopefully will filter down. And I think every single one of us should maintain that hope. We shouldn't be hopeless, you know. And that's just what I wanted to share, because sometimes, like I said, I've really been through the mill in terms of some of my experiences. But I feel that without those experiences, I wouldn't have been able to build up the strength of character that I do have. You know, I'm someone who again, despite the fact that I've got up to a PhD in terms of educational attainment, I still have the ability to say I actually failed every level of education in this country before I won. You know, similar to one of the other speakers, I was always told, yeah, university might be, but why don't you do a diploma? Why don't you do a BTEC? And I'm thinking, why? You know, and for me, it's about, that's the kind of mind frame shift that we need to see in our young people, because especially with things like stop and search, where young people are feeling oppressed and targeted and violated disproportionately, you know, they have to see examples from people that have gone through these experiences for a longer time than them to be able to find hope. And if we just get angry as they get angry without, you know, getting even by actually saying, actually, I know the superintendent and chief superintendent Colin Wingrove, who's the borough commander, and I'm going to make sure I hold you to account, or Karen Finley, who's the Oki commander for the task force, you know, without having to get angry and falling into their stereotypes. Because with stop and search, a lot of the time people don't get arrested for what they was getting searched for. A lot of the time they get arrested for public order, which is to do with when they feel like they're getting roughed up and they respond by either swearing or getting upset or resisting. What you find is you actually get charged with public order offences. And for me, we have to really understand, as long as we can understand how the system works and understand how to hold people to account, I feel like that allows you to be patient in knowing that there will be consequences to this kind of prejudice. And that, I feel like that's the best way for us to weed out. Sorry for coming back again and giving.
Fantastic. No, fantastic. Thank you for that. I'm now going to call for Sanchia Lassia. I'm really happy to introduce her because I didn't really know her very well, but she reached out to me, and actually one thing that I found is quite troublesome with our communities, is that there isn't pulling the ladder down and helping your fellow person on their political journey. There isn't the comradely behaviour that is needed. There's almost an attitude of, I've done it, so you have to do it the hard way too. But she's actually reached out to me and got me involved in a whole network of really positive, strong women. So I'm really happy to pass you on to her.
Thanks, Mariana, and good evening to everyone. And it's really great to connect with you all on Zoomland and just hear such powerful contributions, really. And just thinking about sort of Mariana's last question about sort of, you know, tangible actions or recommendations that we take forward, because I think that's really important. So just a few ideas. So, you know, a review of the curriculum in our schools, in our colleges and in our universities, you know, that embraces the fact that Britain does have a black history, and slavery is part of that, but that's not the whole story. we need to also celebrate the achievements of Black Britons throughout our education system. I think we need to think about how we develop anti-racism training. So it's not about not being racist, but being anti-racist, and develop training strategies and tools for people to be able to do that. Obviously, we know that in politics and in the public and private sector, there's a great underrepresentation of Black people in the senior levels. I've just voted in my Nationwide is a building society. I've just voted in their AGM, and I voted against all of their directors and all of their non-executive directors because they're all white. And I've sent a message to them saying that's not acceptable. You've got members of this society that are very diverse, and you continue to present an all-white board, and that's not acceptable. We've got to implement the recommendations from the Windrush Review, the Lamy Review, the Disparity for Race Audit Review, and all the reviews that have been carried out over the years. You know, we've heard about this commission being announced today, but actually there are so many recommendations that yet haven't been implemented. So actually the urgency is to implement those recommendations and not set up a new commission. And also just work with employers, you know, both in public and private sector, to think about the well-being and safety of Black workers and the communities in which they live and work, because obviously we know about the Public Health England report that Black people are more likely to die from COVID. And so we've got to get employers in their risk assessments to take that seriously as we start to go back to work. So thanks for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to very quickly go to James Beckles, another really great activist who is a councillor and also was a candidate in the EU election. So over to you, James. Please
Great,
share.
thank you very much, Mariana. That's a really good introduction. Better than I can give myself. There's been lots of great contributions and really good to see a lot of familiar faces. Like Sancha, I think we don't need a new commission. We've got all the recommendations we need, but I think our true strengths are that we are reflective of many different backgrounds, but also different professions, different areas of life, and we can feed in more and beyond just Bame issues. And I think we often get pulled and dragged into discussing Bame issues because of who we are. But I think we've got a much more positive and much more broader reach than what's been often given to us. The political system is fraught with a lot of traps, and we are fighting often factional battles. You know, I put my hand up and I can say which part of the party that I belong to, but often I find the biggest struggle often comes internally. And when I say internally, it's often, you know, within your own CLP, or whether it's in your own branch, and raising these issues beyond these areas and having those common threads where we can pull each other together and say, these issues affect all of us. If Black Lives Matter is about, you know, solely Black lives, then it shouldn't negate, you know, brown lives or our Asian comrades, but we should all be working together in common cause. And on social media, I've been having this debate with, you know, other colleagues about it, saying it's not solely about Black lives, it's a catalyst for more change. But how do we get that change? I'm not too sure. But I think we can do that if we're willing to develop that framework, challenge our party, and also challenge the government as well on these issues, and just come back to the point that we don't have to stick to Bame issues alone. We can be broad. We talk about infrastructure. We can talk about jobs. We can talk about employment. We can cover as many areas as possible.
That's an amazing point. I mean, one of the things, as much as I despise the Tories, one of the things that they've done actually better than us is select Bame candidates in all white areas. Why is it that the Labour Party, we can only stand where there's a few of us, a few other of us? It should be open, that we stand where we have the right talents and the skills and the connections to the community, that we will make a positive contribution. So I found this evening really, really empowering, and I hope that we don't just we're not just a talking shop. I'm really happy to read all the policy suggestions. There's some very bright people on this chat who I'm sure will knock out a few blogs before they go to bed. Yes, I'm talking to you, Puna. Yes, and I'm sure they will. And you know, and I think when one of us writes something interesting, we should all share it around and make sure that we get it into all the spaces. And any influence, we all are influential in our own rights. We can make sure that we use these connections, and we don't accept no for an answer. We keep on raising our voices at CLP meetings. We keep on raising our voices at council meetings, within Labour group meetings, within outside organisational meetings. We try and fight hard the imposter syndrome that is a monkey on our shoulders. We are not imposters. We are here because we have a valuable contribution to make. So I'm really, really happy that we've had this evening. I hope everyone has taken something from it and has ideas of what we do next. We're happy to hear your comments. We want to know how we should be organising ourselves, what issues we should be prioritising. If anyone has any talents in terms of design or writing, whichever talents they have, training, mentorship, please let us know. The only way we can do this and make this a really strong movement is if we all pull together. So I don't know if anybody else wants to make a contribution to the discussion.
Yeah, could I come in for 5 minutes, 5 seconds, sorry?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is really healing for me. It's really great because many of us suffer in silence, and are, you know, especially people like Jackie, you know, and myself, we suffer in silence, but, you know, and we don't always get a chance to talk about this. But I think looking at policy, for me, I'm going back to the CLP structure. So when we first join the party, we become activists, we all go along to our local CLPs, and there lies the problemo. You don't get welcomed, you do not get pushed for any positions, you look around you and mostly you don't see people who look like you. Or sometimes what you find is the old, dare I say, colonial divide and rule, where there's already an established Bame ethnic community, should I say, who have worked really hard to get there and really struggled, and they don't want to share because they're scared the ground they've made, you're going to come along and shift it, and they're somehow going to fall out of grace with the white CLP activists, chairs, whatever. And that's really worrying. So I think what the Labour Party needs to do is have a serious conversation about race. It really does. And I'm glad they're doing a lot of really good stuff about anti-Semitism, but it doesn't just stop there, and it doesn't just start there. Our problem is within our party, many of us have parents who voted Labour. That's how we kind of float into the Labour Party. Many of us have Labour values, but we don't feel that Labour is a safe space for us, be it in our CLPs, in our councils, in any of the Labour Party structures. And I don't like the way the Labour Party has used different communities to fight against different communities. So none of us work together and we don't address some of the real problems that we all face from the Labour Party. And every leader comes along, you think this leader's going to be different. I know Jeremy Corbyn came along, they did quite a lot of reviews. I thought he gets it. And again, somehow in translation, it all got lost, you know, it didn't happen. And it's hard. The Labour Party is a beast. It's an institution. It's quite hard to shift some of the views that people have in there. And there are people in that party who've got a vested interest to keep it the way it is. Let's be real about that. Come on, let's be honest, okay? So we really have to use the Black Lives Movement, what we're saying here today, to say enough's enough. We want our CLPs to be safe spaces. We want councillors to have pride being a councillor, not feel isolated, not losing good councillors because they're being bullied or they're being isolated or they're not being promoted. And the same with CLPs. We need to get activists. Labour can't be just a party about one group progressing at the detriment of everybody else, and that's how it feels now. And the Tories are doing well because they are, as you said, promoting people of colour in seats that, you know, aren't predominantly got black people in them, because the Labour Party has a 1950s 40s image of the ethnic minority. It needs to shift it. The way it has the same image of the working class as a white man with a cloth cut that goes down the mines, that isn't the working class anymore. And the Tories have got it. And the Tories have realised that the black community and the Asian community have moved on. They're aspirational. Come on, most of our parents are aspirational. But the word aspirational for our communities is a dirty word in the Labour Party. So we need to be able to tell the Labour Party, this is the community we are, this is who we are. I can stand in the whites of Surrey because I can connect with those people because I'm bloody British. I've got those values. I understand it. And we can push it, but unless our leadership and those at the top want to change it, nothing's going to happen. People work hard to get all women shortlists. We've been fighting for all Bame shortlists, and sometimes it kind of happens in a funny kind of way when certain parties want certain leaders want certain people in, but it doesn't happen on a regular. And if women get that, why can't we? And if you're a Bame woman, you need, as my friend Jackie said, to occasionally get white women to step aside. And again, black men. We don't talk about black men in the party. Black men get absolutely nothing in the party. And it's not happening. It's not happening. Not happening. Happening. Lean back. Pull us up. Help us in areas where you are, where you're doing really well. Because sometimes you are. Do it for black people too. And that's the reality. And I'm sorry to say that, but we have to be honest about this. Otherwise, we're going to have the same conversation 20, 50 years. We need to work together as different ethnic communities, mentor each other, work with each other, and address the elephant in the room.
That's absolutely powerful. Oh, really powerful. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we could possibly carry on all night, but I think what we should do is the steering committee for the organisation is going to take on board and have a sort of discuss everything that's come from this. We're going to obviously do a little bit of a write-up. Please, if you've not signed up to join, please sign up and join so we can keep in regular contact and ask how we all lead each other out of the situation we find ourselves in. I think this is a unique time in history, and we can actually make change happen. But we need to use every single bit of weaponry sorry for the wrong word, but we have to use whatever we can to actually move ourselves forward. So whether it is writing pithy articles, whether it is representation, whether it's getting behind a candidate, I'm happy to go and canvass for anyone, any part of the country. Garinda and I have been to sunny Rhondda, Wales. I'll go anywhere to campaign where I know that it is for the best of the party, for the best of us. So please stay in touch. And we look forward to hosting another event. Can we have your suggestions on whatever event you think we should host next? And people are already messaging me about helping with training, mentorship. Please feed that through. Join the Labour. Somebody will put the email address on the chat. Please sign up and keep in touch, and let's make this happen. Thank you very much.